Aloha, and welcome to the Tao of Paradise, a show about health, safety, and personal growth through the martial arts. I'm your host, Sifu Robert Relm. On today's show, we will explore the ancient aspects of healing energy. Health, like the martial arts, depends on a balance of personal disciplines. Today's show deals with emotional health and the effects that words can have on people. We're proud to have renowned Incan shaman, Mary Raymakers, appear on the show to teach us about healing energy. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this message.
You know, we are involved with three things: the mind, the physical, and the spiritual. That's our triad. But also we are working with the yin and the yang, the give and the take. You know, it's always that. We cannot forget that. You know, it's the give and the take. And we have to have, I think, what Ueshiba put out was love for mankind. Love for each other, no matter how bad they are.
Father, we call you by thousands of names on this planet, and no matter what name we call you by, you always respond. You always answer our call. I'm calling to you tonight. Fill this room with your light, your love, your protection, your guidance. Thank you for letting us sing the song of life one more day. Let us feel you this night. Thank you, Father.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you for having me be here. And I really want to thank each and every one of you for coming tonight, because this is my passion. This is what I have been placed on this planet to do, and I'm so excited when I can share how this work is, because it's so ancient. It's over 100,000 years old, and yet it's so new. And so people aren't aware of it and what it can do to shift and change their lives. I am calling them the ancient Inca energy healing therapies. Big mouthful. Because so many people don't know how to describe what this work is. My teacher calls it the energy medicine from the Americas. I happen to choose these words because it's ancient, it's from the Incas, it's energy healing, and it's a therapy in a way that is unlike any others that I know of. And there's a lot of energy healing modalities out there, and they're all wonderful, and I just happen to believe that we're all drawn to what everyone is needing at this time on the planet. As the shifts are taking place, we're finding those people that have exactly what it is that we need to make our lives shift into a place of joy and peace and beauty. Just look at our world and the trauma that it's going through. If people knew this healing modality could help change their world, it would be something they could be seeking out rather than being stuck in their trauma. The lineage that I'm trained in of the Inca, they call themselves the Quiero, the descendants of the children of the sun. And if you know anything about history of South America and the Inca Empire, the Incas who ruled the empire called themselves the children of the sun. What happened in the Inca Empire is when the Spanish came 500 years ago, they came and they killed the top two leaders. And they knew that this was going to be happening because their prophecies predicted that half man, half horse with shooting fire was going to be coming. And that's who the Spanish were. Even though they didn't have words to describe guns and horses, they were very, very accurate. And the two brothers that were ruling the empire got killed, and the rest of them fled into the mountains into hiding. The Spanish literally went after them and tried to find them to kill them. And they couldn't find him. And legends had always said that when the world was in most need of what they knew, they would be back. So the Quiero reemerged less than 50 years ago. There's a huge festival in South America that's held every year, and over 50,000 people go to this festival. And when the Quiero knew that it was time to reemerge, they went to that festival, and the way the legend said, the way it happened is when they walked into the village where it was being held, the elders of the village recognized them by the emblems on their ponchos that they were the children of the sun. And they went up to them and said, "Welcome back. We've been waiting for you for over 500 years." So what they knew is needed most on this time on the planet is the way they view it. And what I get very excited about is that Their teachings that they've been believing and following and doing and practicing that have been missing from our world from over 500 years, they've been doing for over 100,000 years. So I like to say that these methods have been proven by time. They're not new age, they're not new, they're very, very old. It's just their practice has just reemerged back into the world, which is why I feel part of my mission in this life is to get people exposed to this so that they can find someone who's been trained like I have, so that they can go and see if this is something that can work for them. So that's a little bit of the background of the Inca, that the Kyoto found my teacher, and I found my teachers. People say, how did you find this? I found my teacher, and I found him here in Los Angeles, and my teacher trained with the Kyoto for over 25 years. A little bit of Alberto's background. He's originally from Cuba. He was one of the aristocratic families that when Castro went into power, they fled. So he came here feeling like he wasn't exactly fitting into this world, got into the academic world as he got older, and he actually had a laboratory at the University of San Francisco, I believe it is, small school, where he has his PhD in medical anthropology and psychology, and in the lab he was studying the mind and trying to figure out how does the mind work. And he's talked about how he got very, very frustrated with the limitations that he was going up against on how does the mind work just by studying brain tissue under the microscope. And he would hear about this plant, the ayahuasca plant out of South America, that they say open up channels of the mind. So he decided to go down and explore it. And in the process, he found the Kyoto, or as they pointed out to him, he did not find them, because if the Spanish couldn't find them for 500 years, he certainly didn't find them. But they hand-selected him. They taught him all that they knew and said, we want you to bring this to the north, bring this to the west, and teach people. So Alberto teaches classes all over the world now. And I feel very privileged to have trained with him, because this really is an amazing legend that he's carrying on. The reason it's so important that he do preserve this and take this to the rest of the world is that the Kyoto are dying. They're in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. The head of the Kyoto tribe nearly died last summer. Don Manuel is in his 90s. And what happened is the small villages where they were, their children have decided to go down and mingle back into Western civilization, and they haven't been able to pass these traditions on. But they're not upset about it, because they always knew that this would be brought to the north. This would be brought and expanded beyond who they are. And I like that, because there are very many traditions out there, and I'm not blaming them, but they feel like this is ours. I can't share this. The Kyoto has the opposite. They're like, spread this, get this out there, because this can really help at this time. So that's a little bit about Alberto and the Kyoto, and I want to just jump in right now into what is this ancient Inca energy healing therapy that Marilyn got exposed to in her family, and that she brought me here tonight to tell you about and share with you. I think the easiest way for me to tell you what it is to give you how the Incas see the world, which has been so different from how the rest of the world has seen the way things are for the last 500 to 2,000 years. The Kyoto say, surrounding your physical body, you have an energy field, a luminous energy field. Now that's very new to our modern world, and not only is it new, a lot of times doctors still don't see the connection between the body and what's happening with the spirit and the emotions and the mental. They've always believed that. The Kyoto have always seen the world that way. Science is proving now that we have this energy field. Kirlian photography is able to photograph our aura. And what this energy field, what happens in this energy field that surrounds everything, not just us, but animals, plants, everything has this luminous energy field that surrounds it. But as people, what happens to us is whenever we go through a pain or a trauma or some type of heavy situation that we've gone through, it leaves a cut or an etching in your energy field. And what happens with that cut there would be like if you cut the back of your hand and it never healed. You can go about your day, you know, if you cut the back of your hand, you'd put a Band-Aid on it, and it could even get infected, but, you know, you'd continue to treat it and pretty much ignore it, because you could wash the dishes, you could go to the computer, you could drive a car, you could do everything. But the minute you bump it, ouch. That's right, I cut myself, that hurts. It's the same thing with our luminous field when those cuts are there. Anytime you go through a pain or a trauma and those cuts are in there, it's automatically going to pull into your world that same event over and over again until you clean it out. And from the Buddhist standpoint, that's a blessing, because you celebrate because you know what to heal. So that's what this work, the core of this work, is to do, is to clean out those cuts that are in your luminous field. Clean out those etchings that bring those painful events into your life over and over and over again. And I actually do call it a permanent healing, because unlike some modalities where it can clear out a lot and you can start to feel better, this one actually, once that etching is cleaned out and the heavy emotional pain and trauma that you experience is cleaned out of your luminous field, you don't feel it any longer. It literally is gone, and it's permanently gone. Now, once you clean out a certain issue, that doesn't mean other things won't come up. But the issue that you've just cleaned out, and that heavy pain and trauma that's behind it, that is permanent release. My teacher talks about it's like looking at a photograph album and going, oh, yeah, that happened, yeah, that was it. It doesn't erase your memories, and it's not meant to erase the memories. But what it does is it takes away that deep emotional pain that keeps us oftentimes stuck in that situation. So that's what this work does. I find that it is the easiest, most effective way to clean out emotional pain. And it's not to disqualify that there are a lot of good modalities out there doing a lot of good work. But what I find is that this is the most effective and the most efficient. And once you clean out the emotional pain, oftentimes what I like to do is people's minds just like to go, those thoughts run rampant. Then go to see someone who can help you get those thoughts under control. But if there's no emotional charge behind it, it makes it a whole lot easier to understand a situation. And my teacher always talks about how the understanding doesn't have to come first. In fact, it's more important that you clean it out so that the understanding of what's happened to you can come later and come to you in its own time, so that you fully can understand what's happened to you, and then let it be put to rest and put behind you. So that's how it works. Now, how do I do that? How do I clean out those cuts and etchings? We do it through the chakras. Is everyone familiar with chakras? Have you heard of them? I'll give a brief explanation, because sometimes people have heard of them, but they really don't know what they are. And I'm going to keep it a really, really simple explanation. In this energy field that surrounds your physical body, there are 7 places where that energy becomes most concentrated. It becomes like a vortex of energy it's shaped like a funnel, and it's spinning. It's spinning clockwise when everything's working properly. So when you look at children, their chakras are spinning properly, and what do you see? They're full of life and vitality, and they're happy, and they're joyful, and they bounce back easy from things. Energy's flowing into their body. Those chakras are working. They're doing their job properly. Where they're located: top of the head, the crown, middle of the forehead, the third eye, the throat, the heart. So even though our physical heart is off to the left, the chakras follow the spine. The middle of the stomach, which is the solar plexus, right below the navel, which is the sexual, and then right between the legs is the root chakra. These chakras correspond to the physical body. So throat, guess where it corresponds to? The throat. Crown, guess where it corresponds with? The head. Pretty simple. And they each play a role. They have jobs, so to speak, that they do. So, for example, let me use the solar plexus, because this is a really easy example. The solar plexus is where we connect with the world, with each other. When we're talking with each other, we're actually connecting through this chakra. Now, let's say you've had an argument with someone, and all of a sudden you feel that tightness in your stomach. A lot of people experience that. What's happening is your stomach isn't actually tightening. Your chakra is actually closing, because it's saying, overload, this is heavy, this is not good for me, this is poison. Because a heavy energy, if you think of the energy field that's surrounding your physical body as light, and it literally is light, it's light energy. If you think of that heaviness of an argument through anger, that's heavy, it's toxin, it's poison. So the chakra is saying, I'm not taking this into my system, and it shuts. And that's where, as the chakra shuts, we feel it as a tightening in our stomach. Because we know, I can't take any more of this in. It's too much. It's overloading. So that's the role of this chakra. This is where we connect with the world. Our throat, this is how we voice our truth with each other. So each chakra has a role that they play. And what the chakra, happens to the chakra, like in what I just described to you, that heavy energy of anger, when it gets in there, and those cuts start to happen in your energy field, what happens is it becomes like a clogged drain. If you think about a clogged drain, water can't go down, nothing can go down. Same thing happens with the chakras. They're not working properly any longer. And then our energy field starts to get clogged and overloaded. And that's when we start to feel, I don't feel so good any longer. And that's what happens as we get from a child whose chakras are spinning beautifully to as we get older and we start going through pain and trauma and the chakras start to get clogged and those etchings start to go in. What happens to our faces? What happens to our hair? We start to age. And that's one of the reasons why, because that energy is no longer flowing down into our physical body because it's not flowing down into our chakras that then feed our physical bodies. So that's how I go about cleaning out those cuts. I do it through the chakras. What I do is I find out what chakras are affected. So I test them with using a pendulum. And for me, a lot of people use pendulums. I hear that, they ask you questions and it gives them answers. My pendulum is no more than a heavy weight on a string. That when I hold it over a spinning vortex of energy, if it's spinning properly, that will catch the edge of it and starts to spin. If it's not spinning, or it's rocking, or it's spinning counterclockwise, that means that's a chakra that's been affected. And that means that's a part of your body that's also affected. So oftentimes physical pains and physical ailments are tied in with clogged chakras. And that's where I see some of the miracles happen in my work. As the emotion gets released from the energy field, then suddenly the physical body starts to change and gets better as well. So I find out what chakras are affected. Usually when someone's seeing me for the first time, more often than not, all 7 are blocked. Doesn't have to be, but they are usually. Because if you've gone through a pretty heavy pain or trauma, what's happened is your energy field is loaded. It's maxed out. It can't take any more in. So all the chakras are starting to shut down. So at first I find out what chakras are affected, and then I have stones, kuyas, in my healing bundle. And if you could look down at the floor, that's my healing bundle. My stones are charged with healing energy. And my stones got charged by my teacher's stones. The healing energy that's in my stones were transferred to my stones by my teacher's stones. And my teacher's stones were transferred to him by his teacher. And his teacher before him transferred it to him. So it's a whole lineage going back over 100,000 years of healing in my stones. And what happens with that stone is it gets placed on the lowest chakra that's affected because energy rises. And what happens is that stone starts to draw that heavy energy out of your luminous field, and it starts to pull it out. It starts to clean out those etchings. Now what are you doing? That's what the stone is doing. You're breathing. You're breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, and your breath becomes like a billows on a fire. If you hold a billows to a fire and pump it, that fire gets larger and larger. You do the same thing with your breath. Your breath starts to build pressure within you that starts to push that energy out while the stone is pulling it out. The breath is one of the most important elements. People, when they're going through trauma, hold their breath. And I have to often remind people when they're on the table, breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Get that breath going again. Start to release. The other thing that you're doing, you're feeling what you want to release. That is the way that those etchings get activated, which are tied into the chakras, so that as you're feeling it, it's like, oh yeah, there's the cut. And that's when it starts to get pulled out. If you don't feel the feeling, the stone can pull out to a certain level. But if you don't feel what you want to get rid of, it's not going to get out clean and permanent. So that's one of the most important parts, is to be feeling it. But that's when the magic begins. Now what I'm sometimes asked is, do you have to have any type of spiritual belief or any type of understanding or some sort of religious background? Or is there a religious background that would prevent me from coming to see someone like you? And no. This isn't tied in with any tradition. There's no dogma that's connected with it. For the Kyoto, this is a way of life. This is just how they view life, and this is how they get through life. I view it more as you don't need to be a Buddhist to benefit from acupuncture treatment. And really what I tell people, if you want to clear out your emotional pain and trauma, this really is the easiest, most effective way of doing it. So if you want to heal, give it a try. See for yourself if it works. Another important thing that I like to share with people is that I come from a lineage. I am tied with a lineage. There are people out there that are shamans or doing practices that they don't have a backing behind them. They don't have a whole tradition that's behind them. And that really, it's like in martial arts. You find your master, the Grand Master, follows a lineage that you can trace and know what's happened. I see Otarango has showed up. Mother, Sister Jaguar. So that's also, for me, what's very, very important about being in this lineage. The other thing that for me, when I was going through my training, what was so important is there are safeguards that are placed in my mesa, in my healing bundle, that does not allow me, either consciously or unconsciously, to be able to harm someone. And for me, that was a big relief, because there's oftentimes things that, okay, I can consciously say I'm not going to harm anyone, but wow, somebody look at me the wrong way maybe, and I'm thinking thoughts at them, and the next thing you know, I've just sent energy their way that could do some damage to them. I cannot. What happens when they place the safeguards in our mesa, what happens if I put out anything, it comes immediately back to me, and I deal with it. So that's the other part that for me, it was a real gift to know that there is no harm that can be done to someone if they come to see a shaman from the Inca tradition. I want to talk a little bit now about what else happens in the energy field. The illumination that I was just describing, that takes that heavy energy, that toxic energy, and it releases it through the chakras. But sometimes what happens, I'm going to use an example that my teacher uses because to me it so beautifully illustrates what happens. When we feel betrayed by someone, what are the words we use? I've been stabbed in the back. Well, guess what I'm finding in someone's back who's felt betrayed? On an energetic level, that's what I'm finding. There's a knife in the back. And what happens is that energy crystallizes into such heavy energy, it takes on the shape of knives, spears, weapons, swords. And that's what I find in people's energy fields. And that's where I find when people have physical pain and trauma, if I scan their energy field, guess what I find? I find that object, you remove it, either the pain goes away, or if, even like an example of if someone goes to a chiropractor and something keeps popping out, you remove it, and guess what? That stays lined up then. So it really does. We don't realize in our world just how powerful our words and our emotions are that we exchange with people. And that energy, when it's crystallized like that, the only way I can get it out isn't through the method that I just showed you now. I have to literally take it out. That's one type of heavy energy, the crystallized objects. Another type of energy that I remove from people, we very delicately call it by several different names. I usually call it a hitchhiker. Some people call it a hungry ghost. Some people call it boogie busting. Basically, there's an energy in your field that isn't yours, and it's attached itself to you. And that energy can very greatly influence you. Types of things that I'm talking about, what type of, what attaches to you? Grandma that died and got scared at the last moment and wasn't sure she was ready to die. You're there in the room. Your heart's open. She attaches. Grandma. People we love when they're in transition. People that are in car accidents. That suddenly, it's a sudden death. They weren't expecting it. And they suddenly find themselves without a body. They're confused. What do? They gravitate to the first open person that they can see that they could attach themselves to. Has anyone seen the movie Ghost? Do you remember the scene where Patrick Swayze gets thrown off the train by that being? And he goes back to him and he says, "Teach me how you do that." And Patrick Swayze is trained by him, and he eventually, I can't even remember what it was, a can or something, and it hits the vending machine, and that entity leans against it and he goes, "Oh God, I'd give anything for a drag." Remember that? That's another way that they attach to us. Drugs, alcohol. Especially if they've died in that state, they're looking for a fix. So they're going to look for someone who's doing the fix they want to get. They'll attach usually at the back of the neck. What I find when I'm working with people is that oftentimes addictions, nicotine, alcoholism, drug addictions, it's not as much the person whose physical body needs it, it's these things that have attached to them are saying, "I want that cigarette, I need to smoke." And when you remove them, suddenly that addiction is gone. So these are examples of you have to be vibrating at a certain rate. Everything, energy has a vibration to it. So what the heavy stuff that I was talking about cleaning out of your energy field, if you have anger, for example, and there's something walking by that has a lot of anger wandering around, and you've just now been screaming, that thing, you've opened yourself up to something attaching to you that will now add to your anger. That's the types of things that I remove from people, and I see huge shifts as those things are removed, because we don't even recognize, first off, how easy it is for things to attach to you. Second off, we don't recognize in our world that that's even possible. We say that that doesn't happen. And unfortunately, we have movies like The Exorcist, which give us all that fright of, oh my goodness. Most of the time, 99.99% of the time, that's not what's attached to someone. It's usually a loved one or someone that has had an addiction or a type of vibration that you're vibrating at that will attach itself to you and now add to it. If you want to know a little bit more about how these energies, entities operate, there's a couple of books that I would recommend. I would recommend The Unquiet Dead by Dr. Edith Fiore. I would recommend Remarkable Healings by Dr. Modi, M-O-D-I. And there's another book, I have it here. It's Spirit Releasement Therapy, I think is what it's called. And I think the man's name is Blackwell or Baldwin. If you're interested, come and see me and I'll give you the name of it. But they give a much more detail than I want to give tonight on why they attach, how you can, why these things happen in our world. So that's about as much as I want to do with that topic tonight. Third type of heavy energy that I deal with is sorcery. And I want to talk about sorcery tonight because it seems to be a really hot topic nowadays. And movies like Harry Potter stir up our interest in it. But for the most part, people are really afraid when they hear the word sorcery, black magic. And it puts fear into them, and they don't even want to think about it. They don't want to see it. They don't even talk to me about it. And yet I find I do a great deal of breaking sorcery in my work because the worst sorcerers out there are not Lord Voldemort. The worst sorcerers are ourselves. The black magic and the sorcery we do against ourselves is horrific. Every time we say negative things about ourselves, say we're going to die, say this is going to happen, we put in motion that very thing. That's black magic and sorcery. And we're one of the worst ones to ourselves. The other ones are friends and loved ones. The people that know us best, know our buttons the most, know how to push them. Guess what will get pushed? If you've got a button and someone can push it, guess what happens? It gets pushed. And what I've seen happen sometimes with sorcery is pretty amazing. And so I've decided that I'm going to start talking about it with people, first off, so they can understand it, and second off, how to recognize when someone is under an attack of sorcery. I want to read to you a quote from my teacher so you can get a better idea. We call it sorcery or shamanism in the world of the Inca. You know, it could be a black magician is another terminology that's used. My teacher made one thing very, 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 very clear to us in our first class. The energy that heals is the same energy that kills. What changes it is the intent. What you do with your energy is what happens to it. Conscious or unconscious, meaningfully or unmeaningfully. When we're saying nasty words to each other, and those knives that I just talked about removing when we betray each other, when those things happen, that's sorcery. Here's what my teacher says about sorcery. The teachings of shamanism and sorcery are nearly identical. Whereas the shaman is dedicated to healing others and transforming the world, the sorcerer is exclusively concerned with his or her personal liberation and enlightenment. I'm going to read that again. The shaman is dedicated to healing others and transforming the world. The sorcerer is exclusively concerned with his or her personal liberation and enlightenment. Self-motivation. The practices of the sorcerer can lead to the misuse of power and become a distraction from one's spiritual path. The teachings of sorcery are extraordinarily powerful, and when properly used, can allow one to taste infinity in this lifetime. When used improperly, they can cause harm and disease. The abuse of sorcery and black magic is not limited to the bayous and the jungles. It is rampant throughout modern America. We find it in the offices, in schools, and even among friends and lovers. By us learning how to deal with undoing sorcery and neutralizing the negativity, envy, jealousy, and harm that might be directed toward you or your loved ones, we can transform lives. We live in a world where power is constantly being abused and misused, and where we must learn to be vigilant and protected. Never before has it been important to understand the mechanisms of sorcery and the ways that we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from the tremendous abuse of psychic power around us. It's not the Lord Voldemorts out there. It's those who are closest to us. How does sorcery work? Sorcery activates an etching in your energy field. Those wounds that I was saying in illumination clear out, that's what a sorcerer will activate. Those are your buttons. Those are your triggers. That's what your husband or wife can say a word and set you off in an instant. That's what sorcery can do. A sorcerer, there are sorcerers in South America. They operate like an attorney. You pay them to do good, they will do good. You pay them to do something nasty to someone, they will do something nasty. And what they look for is the same thing that your loved one does. Where's your imprint? Where's your button? They look for that. When someone can't rest deeply, they're having a hard time sleeping, this energy is keeping them stirred up. What they'll do is they'll throw those darts, daggers, swords, spears, they'll throw that at you. That's where when your loved one gets in an argument with you and suddenly you find a spear in your stomach, that's what sorcery is. It's throwing that at another person. Whether you intentionally meant to harm them or not, when we're exchanging those heavy, heavy words, guess what's happening? When I help someone undo sorcery, we are responsible and accountable for everything that we do. We are not victims. And when we start to take accountability and responsibility for our thoughts, our words, how we treat each other, that's the most important way that we can avoid sorcery. And when I'm working with someone and we're cleaning out that heavy energy that's in their force field, we clean out what caused it to come in the first place. But I will not let them be a victim. Oh, he did this to me. Clean it out. Can't be done to you anymore. It's that simple. Another time we're vulnerable to sorcery is when we have surgeries. Feeding tubes literally can go into you that will then siphon off your energy. So if someone comes to me and they're having a hard time sleeping, you know, the list that I'm going to be giving you, when they start ticking off those things, I know what I'm going to be doing next. So when the surgery comes along, you're in a vulnerable position. And if someone starts flinging heavy energy at you, that's when it can enter into your force field. I'll tell you about my sorcery. I donated a kidney to someone. And this man ended up stalking me when I left him. And I have never been in so much terror in my life as when that happened. Finally ended up going to my teacher, and he found a tube where my kidney was that was attached to the person that I gave the kidney to. When he undid the tube and sealed it, it instantly went away. Instantly. All the terror that I felt shifted on the spot. What he was explaining to me and what added complications is the kidneys are part of the endocrine system, which is the fight or flight. So anytime he was a very angry man, his anger would come to me through the tube, I would feel it, I would kick up my terror, and it didn't even, my teacher explained, it wasn't even anger directed at me. He could just feel angry, it'd be fed down the tube to me, my fight or flight kicks in, I'm feeling unsafe, nowhere I could go in the world, and it was all because he was feeding energy through my tube, and the kidney being part of the fight or flight, it was instantly kicking it off. But the minute that tube was removed, it all stopped. It's another example of sorcery. What happens is things get triggered. Those buttons that I talked about, those get triggered. We also have what we call karmic loops. We have patterns that we get locked into. And when those patterns are put into place, like when he was feeding me energy, no matter what I did, my fight or flight was getting triggered. The karmic pattern, the karmic loop was there, and it needed to get broken. Fight or flight gets triggered. If someone's coming to me and there's their fight or flight, that's why my teacher knew immediately what something had happened when that was triggered in. I couldn't sleep. When someone's fight or flight, our fight or flight is meant for emergencies. When the emergency isn't there, we're supposed to go back into normal. But when someone's constantly on edge, they're under an attack. That energy is coming toward them, and they can't find a peaceful place. Sometimes people will go into denial. Oh, nothing's going on. No, he had something going on. The other thing I can mention about it is when sorcery happens and someone's under an attack, we live in a world where it's now starting to becoming very popular to say, well, your karma's returning to you. Sometimes it's not your karma. Sometimes you could be born into a family that something's going on and you chose in your contract to come in and change it. Be the one to make the change to happen. But there's a secondary gain. Even though it wasn't your karma, you got something out of it. And that's what I heal if it's not theirs, if it's not their karma. There's still something in it for them. Like, why did you choose this family that I need to work with to get that shifted? So it doesn't always mean when someone's under an attack of sorcery that it's something that they brought upon themselves. Because that's where it's really common. I hear all the time, oh, well, their karma, they're just living out their karma. No, it's not always the case. Original sin. When people come from traditions that talk about original sin, very, very, very heavy sorcery comes when people feel the guilt, they feel the shame. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. So what do I watch for? What can you watch for? What should you be looking for to know if someone's under an attack of sorcery? Their fight or flight is activated. They're constantly being reactive. They're constantly reacting to a situation. Instead of them taking control and command, it's almost like it's beyond them to be able to do that. Change in sleep patterns. Deep sleepers suddenly can't sleep, waking up oftentimes throughout the night, restless. Change in sleep. When the universe is not collaborating with you, big one. If you're a person who's used to, your life is flowing and you're in the synchronicities and everything's going well, and all of a sudden every time you turn around something's going wrong and you can't stop it, it's almost like feeling like it's beyond you and beyond your control, it's an attack of sorcery usually. That's what I'm finding. So I'm just sharing you signs. Muddled or confused thoughts and feelings. Just can't get things grasped clearly. They'll say things that sound funny, something that just doesn't, you look at them and you go, do you realize what you just said? And it just doesn't sound right, especially if there's someone who normally does sound very coherent and logical. Usually it's a sign of sorcery. Hypervigilance. That ties in with that fight or flight, just constantly on guard, that the world is not a safe place. Chronic fatigue or tired all the time. Just can't get enough sleep. I got 10 hours last night and I feel I could sleep some more. Exhaustion. Because their energy field is so stirred up, they just can't find rest or peace any longer. A sense of disconnection to the body, that they almost feel like they're not really in their body, if someone's talking about that. When I'm working with someone to break sorcery, it usually takes 3 to 4 hours. There's a series of things that I do, and I'm not really going to get into it tonight because we don't have enough time to do that. It's a rather lengthy process, but it does work. My job is to just shift the energy. When I'm working with sorcery, my job isn't to go in and attack. My job is to go in, let's break it, let's, minimum amount of work and effort, and let's get it just shifted. That's really the only thing that matters. If you know anyone who's got these symptoms, you might want to talk to them, well, what's been going on in their life? What's happening? Because they don't need to continue to go through that. So that's why I wanted to give you some things to look for, but also to know sorcery is very common in our world. It's not something that they do in South America. It's not what they do in Africa. It happens all the time in our world, and just be conscious about it. Watch for things that are happening so that you can avoid that happening to you. The last thing that I want to touch on tonight is soul retrieval. Soul retrieval, a lot of different traditions out there do soul retrieval, and each one has a slightly different twist to it. The idea is there's been a soul loss, part of you is splintered off, that needs to get brought back so you can come into wholeness. I want to read a little bit of a quote of what my teacher talks about so you can get a better feel on what happens. It's important to discover the original psychic wound that threw our destiny off course. It's learning how to change the soul contracts that keep us fettered to this wound, and how to move along a timeline to a healed destiny. We can select a future free from the fate scripted by our inherited genetic makeup, our childhood traumas, or even from our karma or past life histories. We can recover lost soul parts and track them to a possible new destiny. In traditional cultures, this is known as soul loss. When a soul loss occurs, we not only lose our destiny, but everything in our life begins to turn sour. We exchange one terrible job or relationship for another. Each of us comes into a world of many possible destinies that govern our lives. Some people who have lost their destiny in utero, when their parents almost terminated their pregnancy, who spent years feeling like they didn't belong in this world. Others lose their destiny through an accident or through a painful divorce. When we lose our destiny, we enter into soul contracts that offer us momentary relief, but at a dreadful price. We can rewrite those contracts so they no longer script us. When a soul part fragments off, I see it oftentimes it happens in childhood, but it's whenever we go through something that is so painful that a part of us feels like we just can't go through it. And it splinters off and goes into what we call the underworld. It's not hell. I had a client that said, oh, it's probably more like the lost and found department in a department store. And I think that's probably a better description of it. It goes away to where it's safe. Because what's just happened to you is making their world no longer safe, and they have to go away. And that's what we do. We retrieve lost soul parts. I've seen some of the most miraculous things happen when we retrieve those lost soul parts. When I go into the underworld, I'm actually going into the soul. I'm entering into the world of the soul. There are 4 chambers that I go to look for that lost soul part. And when I'm finding a lost soul part, it could look like a small child. It could look like a young girl. I've seen so many different ways that the soul part looks that I'm bringing back to return to my client so they can become whole. I go to a gatekeeper. We call him Waskar. And I ask permission to go down there and retrieve that which will make my client whole. Waskar will then, once I've asked permission, will then take me or point to me where the soul part is. I will go up to it and I'll ask, will you come back? Sometimes it says no. And then I'll say, well, what do you need in order to come back? And that soul part will give me instructions. They need to do this, 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 and this first before I'll come back. And then I'll come back up. And I'll tell the person that I'm working with, this is what you need to do first before that soul part will come back. And I'll work with them so that we can get those things put into place so that that soul part can be retrieved. And I've always found, it doesn't happen very often, but I even had it happen to me once where the soul part said, not until you do this. And the minute they told me what it was, I went, oh yeah, I know why. It makes sense to them. They'll know why when I give the instructions. But let's say that soul part is there and willing to come back. They've been waiting. They're ready. They just needed you to be at that place where they could come back, where you've made the world safe for you now so that it can come back. I walk into the first chamber, which we call the chamber of wounds. It shows what was the original thing that happened and why that soul part went away. Sometimes I see it as symbolic of what's happened. Other times I've recognized that it's a past life. It really doesn't matter which it is. What that chamber is showing me and my client, why it went away. What wasn't safe. Once I've gathered all that there is to gather there, I can talk with the parts in it. It's like a dream in the sense that I can interact. If there's a table there, I can ask the table what it's doing there. So in that sense, like a dream, each part has meaning. So when I'm seeing something in a chamber, there's a reason why it's there. I'll walk into the second chamber, which is the chamber of contracts, probably one of the most important chambers that I go into, the chamber of contracts and promises. What did someone unwittingly say they were going to do that when I come back and I say, this is what your contract, and they say, well, I didn't really mean that. That happens all the time in our world. We say things that we don't even recognize that we're making a contract with ourselves. A couple days before I came out here, I was working with a client that came to see me, and his health problems were really triggered. Lungs were filling up with water, heart was going. And he didn't get a chance to see me for a few days, so I was just trying to tune into him. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And I kept coming. There's a contract that something to do with success. Something's not right there. So when he finally was able to come and see me, and I said that to him, his eyes got real big, and he said, oh my God, Mary, I will be a good person if I can live 10 years. He started living a very fulfilling, enriching life, giving back to the community. But his body was holding him to the 10 years. The minute he said that, I looked at him, I said, how long ago was it? That was 11 years ago. And a year ago is when I started having all my problems. His soul, his body was holding him to that contract. We don't realize how powerful those contracts are until something triggers it and we look at it and go, oh my God, I didn't really mean that. And he said, well, at the time, it felt like 10 years would have been a long time. Fortunately, we were able to break that contract, make it null and void, and shift it. But that's how powerful those contracts are, those soul contracts we make with ourselves. Because that's what we come into this life to do. We hold to these contracts. We have agreements that we make that we want to fulfill. And we do get bound to them. The third chamber is the chamber of passions or gifts. What does the soul part have that is missing from your life, that when it comes back is now brought back into your world? I see some of the most beautiful things in those chambers. It's just, I can see the gifts that that person hasn't had, that sense of something being missing. I can see what's been missing. They're beautiful. The fourth chamber is the chamber of treasures. There's a treasure that comes back with them to help them integrate back into life again. Helps them to be back with who they splintered off from. And those two, those are usually pretty beautiful. I will ask if there's a power animal that wants to come back and help that soul part to integrate. Some people have said to me, well, I don't believe in power animals. That's not part of my belief system. And I like to look at a power animal in this way. The natives were wonderful, these indigenous traditions of watching. They observed. They were great observers of nature. And they noticed animals had certain characteristics, instincts that we have lost as humans. So when a power animal is coming back, they're bringing back an instinct that you've had missing, that they, by helping you get this instinct back into your life, will help that soul part to stay so that it doesn't splinter off and leave again. Because that is the other possibility. When a soul part comes back, if you don't make that world safe for them, the reason that they left in the first place will cause them to leave again. And that's where it's really important that we work through the contracts, that we see what was the original thing that happened and why they left, so we can work to shift that so that that doesn't happen any longer. I blow those things into the person I'm working with, I blow that into their chakras. It's like I'm guided. Before I go into the underworld to look for the soul part, I find out what chakra it actually left out of. So I blow that in. But the gifts and the power animal, they tell me where to go. What my teacher does with this tradition of soul retrieval that is missing from a lot of others is we do what we call a mesa proxy, where my client, they select from my mesa, we use objects that represent those different parts in that chamber, so they actually get a chance to interact, just like with a dream. They get to interact with those parts so they can understand and fully engage in what happened. And that's when I see a lot of ahas happening, because basically as they're asking the question, I make them switch so that they're now answering the question. And as they're answering their own question and letting that flow happen, they actually sit in the place where that object is. I actually physically make them get up and sit and change places with it. That's when I see a lot of really amazing things happen. That's when they get it. That's a really important part, that you get why that part left so that it can stay back integrated in your world. And that's usually some of the most fun work I do is in soul retrievals. This tradition is rich in helping people's lives to shift so drastically, so quickly. And I'm just so grateful you came tonight so that I could share this with you. And hopefully you'll get a little clearer understanding about what Inca shaman is all about and have an idea on there are things that we don't need to be afraid of. And there are some very effective ways that you can help shift your world. So thank you so much for being here and allowing me to share this with you.
Hi folks, welcome back. Tonight's show was just one of many interesting topics you'll see on the Tao of Paradise. We want to thank Mary Raymakers for teaching us about ancient Inca energy healing. It's truly amazing how the energetic body is affected by negative words. And yet, the most effective words seem to be the ones that empower others. Upcoming shows will include such topics as serious self-defense for women, and the effects of striking vital zones, featuring Dr. Mike Savona. I'm Sifu Robert Realm. Aloha.